This is my review of the 1957 film The Curse of Frankenstein, by some distance the oldest film that I've ever reviewed on my channel. In fact, I struggle to remember any film I've even seen from before 1957, and the reason I know of this film and have seen it is because it was on TV during the 90s, and it was around about that time that I was watching a lot of Hammer horror films, actually, and similar films from that era, and then there came a point where I didn't watch any for a long, long time. And it was just recently in my life I felt a kind of twang of nostalgia to go back to them. So I sought out The Curse of Frankenstein on DVD. I wasn't even sure if there would be a release for this. But what I found was quite surprising. I found this 3-disc Blu-ray set with all these documentaries and commentaries on it. It cost like £20, and it was very deep in terms of features. And it's turned out to be like one of the best of these types of things I've got on my shelf. I was expecting if I found any release, it would be like one of those crappy DVDs from the noughties that, you know, the type where you just put it in and it doesn't even have a menu, it just plays. So very impressed with that. If you're not familiar with your history of Frankenstein films, they basically made a bunch of these in the 20s and 30s. You probably heard of Boris Karloff, he was the creature. And then Hammer started this second run, except what they did is they flipped it over so that Frankenstein was the creator rather than the monster. I don't mean a monster is sat there designing other monsters. No, this guy's a very much a flesh and blood human being called Victor Frankenstein. He's like this wealthy guy who's got too much time and money on his hands, and he's fascinated with the sciences, and he gets obsessed with this idea of bringing things back to life. He starts off trying to bring a dog back to life, and when he succeeds at that, he moves on to trying to bring a human back to life. But he quickly realizes that it's too hard to find a perfect dead body for this purpose, so he then has to try and steal different body parts from different bodies, and it all starts to get really messy. He finds it hard to hide what he's doing from his friends and family and the authorities, and it just descends from there. This whole film is not a creature feature where the main point of it is to watch the end result of these creations run around killing loads of people. And I mean, there is a bunch of that stuff at the end for us to enjoy, but the main thrust of the story is this journey we go on with Victor as he gets this idea, and then it slowly builds in his head, and he sinks deeper and deeper into the mire as his life just collapses around him. He loses his friends. You know, the women in his life just suddenly don't want to marry him anymore because he's just so sick and perverted in the stuff that he does. He kills people to hide his secret. The whole film is basically about obsession and the lengths people go to keep on with something that they've got this big drive for, but they just don't get that light bulb moment where they realize they have to stop because it's affecting their relationships and the people around them. Victor's played by Peter Cushing, who was a terrific actor back in this 50s, 60s, 70s period. He was in lots and lots of horror films. He actually died when I was just starting to get into these. I remember hearing on the news that he'd passed and thinking to myself, I've literally just been watching him recently. It was literally around about that time. But he's very, very good. When he's going about his experiments in his laboratory, there's a ridiculous amount of like test tubes and wires and spinny wheel things set up, and I just look at this stuff and think, what's that got to do with bringing somebody back to life? I mean, there's like a bottle of red stuff, a bottle of yellow, and it's like, what is that for? But Peter Cushing plays it so serious. He moves from thing to thing, checking this, checking that, as he's just about to try his latest experiment. But he's just so good in the role, and he went on to play this character quite a few times actually over the preceding years. Christopher Lee's in the film as well as the creature. It doesn't come into it until quite late. I think Christopher Lee's probably more well known now among younger people than Cushing is, because obviously Lee's career went on a little bit longer. He did things like Lord of the Rings. Very famous for his sort of booming, commanding voice, like of Saruman or Scaramanga. But in this film, he's got no speaking lines. He's literally just this creature with all these spangly arms and legs, like doing his best to move around like a kind of 1950s Jack Sparrow. But you can just tell by looking at this guy that he gets hold of you, then you're in big trouble. There's a terrific scene where Victor doesn't realize that these creatures come to life yet, and he opens the door and he's just stood there. It's a real shock moment, one of the best in the movie, definitely. But at the center of this film is this whole ethical question of, should we as humans seek to find the answers to bringing people back to life, or should we just leave that alone and just accept that we have this finite life of, less than 100 years or whatever it is in everybody's case? And you know what? two different people watching this film could come down on both sides of the fence. It's not the fact that Victor wants to pursue this that makes him so crazy. It's the lengths that he goes to carry on doing it when clearly outside factors are trying to pull him back because it's just not good for him. You know, he's going to lose his close relationships or his chance at close relationships. One thing I should also mention, if only to defend them, are the special effects. Obviously, they didn't have the means or the technology back then to do the kinds of things they can today. And I think one of the things these older films struggled with more than anything was having a big bombastic finale to kind of finish things off and outdo anything else that had already been shown during the runtime. But in the Curse of Frankenstein's case, they have a really good ending. And there's this big elaborate set piece on this roof with Frankenstein and the monster and one of the women whose names I forget, and there's like a stunt with fire and this acid bath. It's pretty terrific. And then we get this secondary ending where we get to discover Victor's fate with the authorities in this really cool looking dungeon, and Cushing gets this amazing scene right at the end to really get his teeth stuck into. A lot of the film feels very script heavy, as you'd expect with a film that has to make up for the technological limitations. At times it feels like watching theatre. The way the actors sort of move around the room in certain ways to keep the dialogue interesting, and the settings, these really lavish dining rooms and sitting rooms. Right at the start of the movie, there's this long shot of this priest going up this path towards the Frankenstein residence in the background. I mean, obviously it's a matte painting, but it immediately puts you right in this Swiss setting right from the off. It's really good. In terms of negatives, I don't really have anything substantial. There's one thing I noticed that stood out early in the movie. Victor's friend Paul, who's supposed to be his teacher, he looks about 45-ish when he's teaching a 16-year-old Victor, played by a different actor in this scene. And then later on in the movie, Victor's become 45, 50 himself, but Paul looks exactly the same age, but you sort of let it slide, don't you? So on the whole, this is an excellent film. Definitely a good entry point if you'd sort of like to try out Hammer horror films. So let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I have given this movie. Lots of axes in here today. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 bloody axes for the Curse of Frankenstein out of 5. That is an excellent rating for such an old film. Definitely go and see it. It's an old un, but a good un. And we also have a new pin for the horror locations map. We haven't done Switzerland before, so I'll be putting that in a separate clip just after this one. I'll be back soon to do another review from the Hammer series, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, I will see you. Bye-bye. It's very tightly congested is Europe on this map, but Switzerland is in there, right in the middle. Definitely only one pin for Switzerland. No more is going to get in there.